Hey there, hunters. Before we settle in for tonight's tale, I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Drop a comment and let me know what corner of the earth you're resting in as we explore the gothic streets of Yharnam together. There's something comforting about knowing we're all out here, sharing these stories across the dark. Tonight, we're journeying into one of the most heartbreaking stories ever told in a video game. This isn't a tale of monsters and beasts, though those certainly haunt its edges. This is a story about love that was never spoken, obsession that consumed everything it touched, and guilt that transcended death itself. This is the tragic tale of Gehrman, the first hunter, and Lady Maria of the Astral Clocktower. In the decrepit city of Yharnam, where gas lamps flicker against an endless night and the scent of blood hangs heavy in the air, two souls became bound together in ways neither could have imagined. One loved silently, desperately, creating monuments to an affection that would never be returned. The other fought valiantly, died tragically, and never knew the depths of devotion she had inspired. And between them, a cosmic entity pulled strings, trapping one in an eternal dream, while the other guarded secrets in a nightmare without end. This is a love story, yes, but it's also a horror story. Because sometimes the most terrifying thing in the world isn't a beast with fangs and claws. Sometimes it's the quiet desperation of unrequited love. Sometimes it's the weight of guilt that follows you beyond death. Sometimes it's realizing that the person you loved never knew, and now they never will. So let's begin the first hunter. Long before the hunter's dream existed, before the workshop became a place of spectral guidance, there was simply Gehrman, a man, a hunter, perhaps the greatest hunter who ever lived, but still, at his core, just a man who saw a problem and decided to solve it. The beast scourge came to Yharnam like a plague, though calling it a plague doesn't quite capture the horror of it. People didn't just sicken and die. They transformed. Their humanity peeled away like old skin, revealing something savage and wrong underneath. Fathers became slavering monsters that devoured their families. Mothers turned into creatures that prowled the streets, hunting anyone unfortunate enough to cross their path. The city's great accomplishment, its miracle cure through blood ministration, had become its curse. Most people cowered in their homes when the beasts emerged, barricading doors and praying for dawn. The Healing Church sent out their own hunters, sanctioned killers who tried to cull the growing tide of transformation. But Gehrman was different. Gehrman saw the beasts and understood that fighting them required more than just courage. It required adaptation. He looked at his everyday clothes, his common tools, and he made adjustments. He modified his attire for mobility, for protection, for the kind of fighting that would be needed against creatures faster and stronger than any human. But more importantly, he looked at his weapons and saw their limitations. A sword was a sword, an axe was an axe. You couldn't change them mid-fight, couldn't adapt to the shifting nature of combat against beasts that moved like nightmares. So Gehrman created something new, the burial blade, a weapon that could be a curved sword in one moment and a deadly scythe in the next. A trick weapon, the first of its kind, that embodied the principle that would define all hunter combat moving forward. Adaptability, transformation, the ability to shift your approach as quickly as your enemy shifted theirs. The burial blade wasn't just a weapon, it was a philosophy given form. And with it, Gehrman became the first hunter, the man who would teach others how to fight the beasts, how to move with that peculiar agility that separated hunters from mere warriors. He didn't just fight, he danced, he flowed, he moved through combat with a grace that would become legendary, that would define the hunter's art for generations to come. Gehrman established the workshop, a place beneath what would become the Grand Cathedral, directly under Uden Chapel. Here, hunters could enhance their weapons and flesh using blood, could prepare for the nightly hunt, could learn from the first hunter himself. The workshop became a haven, a sanctuary where those brave or foolish enough to fight the beasts could find guidance and purpose. Gehrman knew Lawrence, the ambitious scholar who had found the healing church. He knew Master Willem, the provost of Bergenwerth, whose quest for eyes and insight would drive so much of Yharnam's tragedy. In his dialogue, Gehrman calls Willem Master Willem, suggesting a relationship of respect, perhaps even of student to teacher, though Gehrman never wore the student uniform. He was something else, something apart, a warrior in a world of scholars, a practical man in a place, of lofty theories, and he took apprentices, hunters who learned at his feet, who mastered the art of quickening, moving so fast they seemed to blur. One such apprentice mastered this technique so completely that all that remained of them was a bone buried in the workshop graveyard, a relic of someone who had achieved perfection in their deadly art. But among all his students, all the hunters he trained and sent into the night, one stood above the rest. One captured his attention, his admiration, and eventually his obsessive devotion in ways that would doom them both. Lady Maria of Cainhurst, the noble hunter. Maria came from a world of blood and aristocracy, of ancient castles and darker magics. Cainhurst was a place where blood wasn't just a means of healing or a source of power, it was everything. The noble families there had mastered blood magic, could wield their own crimson life force as a weapon, could call upon sanguine powers that made them nearly immortal. Maria was distantly related to Queen Annalise herself, the immortal ruler of the vile bloods, the woman who could not die no matter how many times she was struck down. Maria should have embraced this heritage, should have revelled in the blood arts that were her birthright. But she didn't. She rejected them completely. Instead, Maria favoured the Rakuo, a beautifully crafted weapon that split into a katana and dagger. The Rakuo required dexterity, skill, finesse. It demanded that its wielder be a master of technique rather than relying on supernatural powers. When Maria fought, she fought with pure skill, with movements so precise and graceful they seemed almost like a dance. She didn't need blood magic. She was better than that. Why did Maria reject her Cainhurst heritage? The game never tells us explicitly, but we can infer. Perhaps she saw the corruption in Cainhurst's aristocracy, the way they had become so obsessed with blood that they'd lost sight of their humanity. Perhaps she simply wanted to prove that she could be great on her own merits, that she didn't need the crutch of her family's dark gifts. Or perhaps she just found blood magic distasteful, wanted no part of powers that felt so visceral, so invasive. Whatever her reasons, Maria left Cainhurst and came to Yharnam. She joined the nightly hunt, and she became Gehrman's student. Maria had great admiration for Gehrman. Here was the first hunter, the man who had essentially invented the art of beast hunting, who moved with a grace that matched her own fighting style. She respected him as a teacher, as a mentor, perhaps even as a friend. She learned from him eagerly, mastered the hunter's way, became one of the greatest hunters of her generation. But she was completely unaware of the mania growing in Gehrman's heart. Gehrman fell for Maria in a way that consumed him. It wasn't a healthy love, wasn't the kind of affection that seeks the other person's happiness above all else. It was an obsession, a fixation that bordered on worship. He watched her trains, memorized every detail of her appearance, held on to every word she spoke like they were sacred scripture. In his workshop, in a cupboard, he kept one of her hair ornaments, a small thing, a simple accessory, but to Gehrman it was a treasure beyond price. But he never told her. Gehrman, for all his skill with a blade, for all his prowess as a hunter, couldn't find the courage to speak his feelings. Perhaps he knew they wouldn't be reciprocated. Perhaps he understood that Maria saw him as a mentor and nothing more, that crossing that line would destroy their relationship entirely. Or perhaps he was simply too afraid of rejection, too caught in his own head to take the risk. So he kept a book in his workshop, a book titled How to Pick Up Fair Maidens, like a nervous teenager rather than the legendary first hunter. He had Maria right there, training under him, speaking with him daily, and he couldn't bring himself to be honest about his feelings. Instead, he retreated into fantasy, into longing, into an internal world where his love could remain perfect because it was never tested against reality. Maria, oblivious to all of this, simply continued being an excellent hunter. She wore a lumen flower brooch, a delicate accessory that spoke to a gentler side of her personality. Despite her skill with weapons, despite her ability to cut down beasts with ruthless efficiency, there was something tender about Maria, something that cared about beauty, about small, lovely things in a world of horror. Together, Gehrman and Maria would go on hunts. They worked as a team, their fighting styles complementing each other perfectly. Where Gehrman was the innovative genius who had invented the hunter's way, Maria was the perfect execution of that art. They must have made an incredible pair, two legendary hunters moving through the night like death itself. But then came the assignment that would destroy everything, the mission that would shatter Maria's spirit, cement Gehrman's obsession, and ultimately trap both of them in different kinds of hell. They were going to the Fishing Hamlet, the sin at the Fishing Hamlet. Master Willem of Byrgenwerth had a theory. Humanity could evolve, could transcend its base nature, could achieve something greater. But this evolution required understanding, required insight, and insight, Willem believed, came from eyes. Not just physical eyes, but inner eyes. Eyes on the inside of one's brain, lining the skull with vision that could perceive truths hidden from normal human perception. We are thinking on the basest of planes, Willem would say. What we need are more eyes. So when word reached Byrgenwerth that something incredible had washed up on the shores of a small fishing village, Willem wasted no time. A great one, Kos, an actual god from beyond the stars lying dead on a beach, her corpse teeming with parasites unlike anything found in human beings, and inside her womb, an unborn child, the orphan of Kos. This was everything Byrgenwerth had been searching for, a chance to study a great one directly, to pierce the veil of cosmic secrets, to achieve the evolution that Willem dreamed of. The scholars prepared an expedition to the Fishing Hamlet, and they needed protection. They needed hunters. Gehrman and Maria were among those sent to guard the scholars. Along with other hunters, they travelled to this remote coastal village, a place that seemed caught between worlds even before Byrgenwerth arrived. The villagers had been changed by Kos's presence. Her parasites had infected them, transformed them into fish-like hybrids, creatures caught between human and aquatic. They weren't monsters exactly, just different. Changed. and they worshipped Kos as their mother, their deity, the being who had blessed them even in death. What happened next was a massacre. The Byrgenwerth scholars didn't just study the villagers, they butchered them. They cracked open their skulls, searching for eyes, for the insight they believed must be growing inside these transformed beings. They experimented on them, vivisected them, treated them like specimens rather than people. The hunters, Gehrman and Maria among them, were there to ensure the villagers didn't resist, and the orphan, that poor wizened child still clinging to its mother's corpse. The scholars showed it no mercy. They murdered it, tore it from Kos's body, extracted its umbilical cord for study. A great one's child killed before it could even truly be born. The ultimate blasphemy. Maria was there. She witnessed it all. She might have even participated, following orders, doing what was necessary to protect the scholars. But something broke inside her that day. This wasn't hunting beasts. This wasn't protecting people from monsters. This was cruelty for the sake of knowledge. This was butchery dressed up as science. After the massacre, after the scholars had taken what they wanted and left the fishing hamlet in ruins, Maria couldn't bear it anymore. She took her beloved Rakuo, the weapon she had favoured over all the blood magic of her heritage, the blade that had made her legendary, and she threw it into a well, cast it away like something contaminated, like something she could no longer stomach using. A corpse should be left well alone, she would later say. Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. She knew. She understood that the pursuit of knowledge, of eyes and insight, had driven them to commit atrocities, and she wanted no part of it anymore. Gehrman was also there at the fishing hamlet. He too participated in, or at least witnessed, the horrors inflicted on the villagers. But his reaction was different. Where Maria was overcome with guilt and disgust, Gehrman seemed to compartmentalize it, to file it away as a necessary evil, or perhaps it simply didn't affect him as deeply. We know he was troubled, we know he would eventually be haunted by it, but in the immediate aftermath, he continued on. But Maria's transformation after the fishing hamlet changed everything. The bright, skilled hunter who had been his prize student became someone else, someone quieter, someone carrying a weight that could never be lifted. And Gehrman, unable to help her, unable to ease her suffering, could only watch as the woman he loved descended into despair. Maria's descent. After the fishing hamlet, Maria didn't die immediately. She tried to atone. She tried to do something good, to balance out the horror she had participated in. The Healing Church, in its endless quest for eyes and evolution, established a research hall. Here, they conducted experiments on people, trying to transform them, trying to force evolution through grotesque means. Patients would imbibe water infused with phantasms, listening for the howl of the sea, their heads expanding grotesquely until they were more brain than person. Many of them died under examination, their bodies cast into the corrosive acid that lined the base of the research hall's spiral staircase. Maria became their caretaker. She couldn't stop the experiments. The Healing Church was too powerful, their quest for knowledge too all-consuming. But she could be there for the patients. She could offer them comfort, kindness, small mercies in their suffering. To them, she became a mother figure, not Dr. Maria or Hunter Maria, just Lady Maria. A gentle presence in a place of horror. She gave one patient, Adeline, a key to a balcony, not because it served any medical purpose, but because Maria thought Adeline might find comfort in the faint breeze that carried the scent of flowers from outside. Such a small thing, such a human thing. But it showed that Maria still cared, still tried to preserve some beauty and gentleness in a world dedicated to cruelty. But it wasn't enough. It could never be enough. Every patient who died under examination was another weight on her conscience. Every scream, every transformation gone wrong, every life snuffed out in the name of knowledge added to the guilt she already carried from the Fishing Hamlet. Maria had rejected blood magic her entire life, had built her identity on being better than that, on relying on pure skill rather than supernatural power. But what good was skill against guilt? What good was technique against the memories that haunted her every waking moment? Eventually Maria returned to the Astral Clocktower at the top of the research hall. This massive structure, built to interpret the stars, to read cosmic secrets from the heavens, became her final refuge. She sat in a chair, a richly decorated seat that felt more like a throne than furniture, and she slit her own throat and wrists. Blood pooled around her, staining her clothes, dripping to the floor. She died there, alone, having never spoken of the horrors she'd witnessed, having never shared the burden that crushed her. A corpse in a chair, blood still wet, forever guarding the secret path to the fishing hamlet that lay beyond the clock tower. She died believing that some things should remain hidden, that some knowledge isn't worth obtaining, that some corpses should be left well alone. And she died never knowing that the first hunter, the man who had trained her, had loved her with an obsession that would outlast death itself. The doll. When Gehrman learned of Maria's death, something in him shattered completely. We don't know exactly how he found out. Perhaps word came back from the research hall. Perhaps he went looking for her when she stopped appearing at the workshop. Perhaps he simply knew, the way you sometimes know when someone important is gone from the world. But however he learned of it, the news destroyed him. He had never told her how he felt, never spoken the words that might have changed everything, or might have changed nothing. Now he never could. Maria was gone, and with her went any possibility of his love ever being acknowledged, let alone returned. But Gehrman was a craftsman, a creator, a man who could take raw materials and fashion them into something new. If he couldn't have Maria, he would make her. He would recreate her, capture her in a form that could never leave, could never die, could never reject him. So he built a doll. The craftsmanship was exquisite, borderline obsessive. Every detail of Maria's appearance was replicated. Her height, her facial features, her clothing styled with the same lumen flower motifs that Maria had favoured. The doll even wore the same brooch at her neck, the same delicate accessory that had graced Maria's throat. Gehrman spared no expense, no effort, poured his skill and his mania into creating a perfect copy. The doll set's description says it all. A deep love for the doll can be surmised by the fine craftsmanship of this article and the care with which it was kept. It borderlines on mania and exudes a slight warmth. Borderlines on mania. That's what Gehrman's love had become. Not a healthy affection that wanted the best for the beloved, but an obsession that demanded possession, that couldn't accept loss, that needed to create a facsimile rather than accept reality. But there was a problem. The doll was just that. A doll, an inanimate object, beautiful but empty, a monument to lost love rather than a living companion. Gehrman sat in his workshop with this perfect recreation of the woman he'd loved, and it couldn't speak, couldn't move, couldn't fill the void that Maria's death had left. He kept the doll in the old abandoned workshop, along with Maria's hair ornament that he'd saved in a cupboard. Surrounded himself with relics of her, tried to pretend it was enough, but it wasn't. It could never be. And in his desperation, in his loneliness, in his grief that had curdled into something darker, Gehrman did something that would doom him forever. He made contact with the Great One. Not just any Great One, the Moon Presence, Flora of the Moon, of the Dream. An eldritch entity whose nature was as alien and incomprehensible as the night sky itself. And Gehrman, in his grief and madness, offered it something in exchange for what he wanted. The contract. Among Gehrman's possessions was a third of an umbilical cord. These grotesque relics were the precursors to umbilical cords that every infant Great One possessed. They could be used to make contact with the Great Ones, to reach across the gulf that separated human and cosmic consciousness. The description of one such cord found in the abandoned workshop reads, "Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate." The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Every Great One loses its child. This was a universal truth in Bloodborne's reality, a cosmic law that governed these entities. They reproduced, or tried to, and their children always died. Always. And in their grief they yearned for surrogates, for something to fill the void left by their lost offspring. The Moon Presence was no different. It had lost its child, and it yearned for a surrogate. And when Gehrman used the umbilical cord to make contact, when he reached out in his desperation to give life to the doll, the Moon Presence saw an opportunity. A contract was established. The Moon Presence would give life to the doll, would create the hunter's dream as a place for Gehrman to continue his work of training hunters. In exchange, Gehrman would serve as the Moon Presence's surrogate child, bound to the dream forever, unable to wake, unable to die, trapped in an endless cycle of guiding hunters through their nightmare. Did Gehrman understand what he was agreeing to? Did he realize he was trading his freedom, his very existence, for the chance to have a pale shadow of Maria in his life? Or was he so consumed by grief and obsession that he would have accepted any terms, paid any price, just to not be alone anymore? We'll never know his exact thoughts in that moment, but we know what happened next. The hunter's dream was born. It took the form of Gehrman's workshop, or rather, an idealized version of it. The same workshop where he had trained Maria and countless other hunters, now existing in a space between dreams and reality. The dream was lit with an eternal twilight, peaceful in a way Yharnam never was, with flowers growing where they had no business growing, with the scent of memories rather than blood. And the doll came to life. She moved. She spoke. She could greet hunters, could channel their blood echoes into strength, could serve the function of a companion and guide. The Moon Presence had kept its end of the bargain. The doll lived. But she wasn't Maria. Not really. The doll had Maria's appearance, Maria's voice, both voiced by the same actress, Iveta Muradaslova. But she lacked Maria's personality entirely. Where Maria had been headstrong, determined, passionate about her beliefs, the doll was gentle, compliant, submissive. She existed to serve, speaking in soft tones, never questioning, never challenging. The doll would say things like, "Hello, good hunter. I am a doll, here in this dream to look after you." Pure and simple. She had no ambitions of her own, no fierce rejection of blood magic, No guilt over past actions. She was everything Maria wasn't, despite wearing her face. And Gehrman, who had created her, who had demanded her existence, grew to resent her for it. He had wanted Maria back, but the moon presence had given him something else entirely. A companion that looked like her but had none of her fire, none of the qualities that had made him fall for her in the first place. He found himself unable to truly love the doll, unable to find comfort in this hollow recreation. But by then, it was too late. The contract was sealed. Gehrman was bound to the hunter's dream, trapped in his wheelchair, unable to leave. His right leg was missing, replaced by a peg leg. Whether this was part of the moon presence's binding, or something Gehrman had done to himself, old hunter wisdom held that beast blood crept up the right leg, and perhaps he'd severed it in fear, is unclear. But it didn't matter. He couldn't escape the dreamer's prison. The hunter's dream should have been a sanctuary. It was beautiful in its way, with flowers blooming eternally, with the workshop perfectly preserved, with lanterns burning soft and steady against the night. Hunters who died in Yharnam would wake here, safe, able to try again. It was a gift in theory, immortality through resurrection, powered by the dream. But for Gehrman, it was a prison, and he knew it. On rare occasions, when hunters visit the dream and Gehrman isn't present in his usual spot, they might find him sleeping in the garden behind the workshop, and if they listen carefully, they can hear him murmuring in his sleep, pleading, begging, "Oh, Lawrence, Master Willem, somebody help me. Unshackle me, please. Anybody. I've had enough of this dream. The night blocks all sight. Oh, somebody, please." The voice trails off into crying, desperate, heartbroken sobs from the legendary first hunter, reduced to begging for release from anyone who might listen. Lawrence, who had founded the Healing Church and made the contract that summoned the moon presence in the first place. Willem, his old master, who might understand the cosmic forces at play. Anybody. Please. But nobody comes. Nobody can help. Gehrman is alone in the dream except for the doll, who serves him dutifully but cannot understand his suffering, cannot provide the companionship he actually needs. The crying is significant for another reason. The sound file used for Gehrman's sobbing is the same one used for another entity, the Orphan of Kos. When that newborn Great One crawls from its mother's corpse in the hunter's nightmare and looks up at the dark sun, it cries, and the sound is Gehrman's voice, distorted but unmistakably the same audio. This connection between Gehrman and the orphan runs deeper than mere recycled sound files. They're linked by guilt, by the curse that emanated from the Fishing Hamlet. Gehrman was there when the orphan was murdered, when the villagers were butchered, when the sin was committed that would create the hunter's nightmare. And though the moon presence bound him to the dream rather than letting him be dragged into the nightmare with the other blood-drunk hunters, he still carried that guilt. In the hunter's nightmare, a twisted reflection of Yharnam where the most depraved hunters are trapped in eternal suffering, the Orphan of Kos waits. A manifestation of vengeance, of innocent suffering, of a crime that can never be forgiven. And even across the boundary between dream and nightmare, Gehrman can feel it. The orphan's existence torments him, a reminder of what he did, what he allowed to happen. The doll notices. After a hunter defeats the Orphan of Kos in the nightmare and disperses its shade back to the sea, the doll says, "Oh, good hunter, I can hear Gehrman sleeping. On any other night he'd be restless, but on this night he sounds so very calm." Perhaps something has eased his suffering. For the first time in who knows how long, Gehrman sleeps peacefully. Because the orphan is gone. Because that particular weight of guilt has finally been lifted. The curse is broken, or at least weakened, and Gehrman can rest. But it doesn't free him from the dream. That prison remains. Night after night he sits in his wheelchair or stands in the garden, waiting. Guiding hunters who come through, giving them hints and tools, sending them off to face beasts and horrors. And when they succeed, when they defeat Murgo's wet nurse and silence the nightmare's newborn cry, Gehrman offers them something he can never have for himself: mercy, the offer. When a hunter completes their task, when they've pushed back the beast scourge enough for one night, Gehrman meets them in the garden behind the workshop. The great tree there, with its branches reaching toward an invisible sky, serves as their meeting place. The night and the dream were long, Gehrman says. His voice is tired, ancient, carrying the weight of countless cycles. You've done well. Now I will let you in on a secret. You were never meant to be here for long. He offers the hunter a choice. Submit your life, let Gehrman kill you with a burial blade, and wake in the real world. The hunt will be over for you. You'll wake in Yharnam as the sun rises, free from the dream, able to live whatever life remains to you. You'll forget the worst of what you experienced, remember it all as a bad dream, and move on. It's the same mercy Gehrman wishes someone would grant him. Freedom through death in the dream, awakening in reality. He offers it knowing how precious it is, how desperately he wants it for himself. If a hunter accepts, Gehrman rises from his wheelchair. Despite his age, despite his missing leg, he moves with the grace of the legendary first hunter he once was. He readies the burial blade, transforms it into its scythe form, and with one clean strike he beheads the hunter. The hunter wakes in Cathedral Ward. The sun is rising. The bell tolls in the distance. The night is over. The dream releases them. And in the hunter's dream, the doll kneels by a new gravestone praying, "Farewell, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world." Gehrman remains, trapped, alone again, waiting for the next hunter to arrive, to guide, to eventually free. An endless cycle of granting others the escape he can never have. But what if a hunter refuses? If a hunter rejects Gehrman's offer? If they choose to remain in the dream, Gehrman's demeanour changes. The kindly old mentor becomes something else, something desperate. Dear, oh dear, what was it? The hunt? The blood? Or the horrible dream? Oh, it doesn't matter, it always comes down to the hunter's helper to clean up after these sorts of messes. He rises from his wheelchair, and the fight begins. Tonight Gehrman joins the hunt. This isn't an old man in a chair anymore. This is the first hunter in his element, moving with impossible speed and grace. He wields the burial blade with mastery no other character in the game can match, transforming it seamlessly between curved sword and scythe, covering massive distances with his quickening technique. He summons spectral blades, performs devastating combos, demonstrates why he was called the greatest hunter who ever lived, and he's crying. Throughout the battle, Gehrman weeps. You can hear it in his voice when he speaks, see it in his movements. He doesn't want to fight. He wants to free this hunter, to grant them the mercy of escape, even if they're too foolish or stubborn to accept it willingly. He'll kill them by force if necessary, because that's better than letting them remain trapped as he is. But if the hunter wins, if they defeat the legendary first hunter, something changes. Gehrman falls to his knees, wounded, and the moon presence descends. Flora of the moon, of the dream. The eldritch entity that had bound Gehrman to this place, that had created the dream as a hunting ground for its own purposes, it drops from the sky like a massive pale serpent, tentacles writhing, its form barely comprehensible to human eyes, and it attacks the hunter who defeated Gehrman, because that hunter has proven themselves strong enough, capable enough, worthy of becoming the moon presence's new surrogate child. If the hunter defeats it too, if they strike down even this cosmic entity, they take Gehrman's place. They become bound to the dream, the new guide for hunters, the new prisoner. The doll finds them in the garden, sitting in Gehrman's wheelchair, and she kneels before them. Good hunter, you have come. Dawn will soon break. This night and this dream will end. Gehrman awaits you at the foot of the great tree. But there is no Gehrman anymore. The hunter is Gehrman now, trapped in the same cycle, the same prison, the same wheelchair, and somewhere Gehrman himself has finally been freed, though we never see what became of him. There's a third ending too, one that requires the hunter to have consumed 3 third umbilical cords throughout their journey. With the insight provided by these cords, with eyes lining their brain, the hunter can perceive what's really happening. When the moon presence descends to bind them, they resist its embrace. They fight it and win, and instead of being imprisoned, they transcend. The hunter transforms into an infant great one, a slug-like creature that the doll gently picks up and cradles. "Are you cold?" she asks tenderly. "Oh, good hunter." The cycle is broken. The moon presence is dead or dispersed. The dream continues, but now it's presided over by a new great one entirely, one that was born from a human hunter rather than descending from cosmic heights. Whether this is better or worse for future hunters is unclear. But Gehrman is finally free. Maria in the nightmare. While Gehrman suffered in the hunter's dream, Maria endured her own torment elsewhere. The hunter's nightmare, a twisted reflection of Yharnam created by the curse of the Fishing Hamlet, had ensnared her. The nightmare was built from guilt and blood-drunk madness. Hunters who had given in to their worst impulses, who had hunted for the thrill of killing rather than to protect people, who had drunk blood until they could no longer distinguish beast from human, all of them were trapped here. It was a hell designed specifically for hunters, forcing them to relive their hunts eternally, surrounded by beasts and victims and blood. The nightmare took the form of old Yharnam, the cathedral ward, the research hall, all the places where the worst atrocities had been committed. And at its deepest point, past the Astral Clocktower, past the barrier that kept secrets locked away, lay the Fishing Hamlet itself, the source of the curse, preserved in nightmarish form, with its fish people villagers and Koz's corpse still on the beach. Maria's spirit, or perhaps her consciousness, or perhaps something that could no longer be called either, guarded the clock tower. She sat in the same chair where she died, blood still staining her clothes, still wet after all this time. A corpse that wouldn't rot, trapped in the moment of death, unable to move on. When hunters following Ludwig's guidance finally reached her, when they rang the bell to summon her attention, Maria rose from her chair. "A corpse should be left well alone," she said, her voice carrying that same conviction she'd held in life. "Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly. Only an honest death will cure you now, free you from your wild curiosity." She didn't want anyone reaching. The Fishing Hamlet didn't want the sins committed there to be discovered, the horrible truth laid bare. Better to kill these hunters, to grant them the death they needed, than to let them proceed and see what lay beyond. And then she fought. In life, Maria had rejected blood magic completely, had built her entire identity on being better than that, on fighting with pure skill. But in the nightmare, all pretense fell away. She used the blood arts of Cainhurst freely, coating her Rakuo in her own blood, creating explosive projectiles of crimson energy, calling upon powers she had spent her life denying. Perhaps this was part of her punishment. Perhaps the nightmare forced her to become the very thing she had hated, to embrace the heritage she had rejected. Or perhaps in death she no longer cared about such distinctions. She would do whatever was necessary to keep the secret secret, to let corpses lie. Her fighting style was breathtaking and terrible. She moved with inhuman speed, slashing with the Rakuo in one hand and the dagger in the other, creating patterns of blood in the air. As the fight progressed, she coated her weapons in blood, then set that blood aflame, her attacks leaving trails of fire. And in her final phase, she abandoned the Rakuo entirely, simply releasing blood from her hands, creating pools of explosive crimson energy, calling upon the full power of her Cainhurst heritage. It was beautiful. It was horrifying. It was everything Maria had never wanted to be, everything she had run from, made manifest in this nightmare reflection of who she was. And when hunters finally defeated her, when they struck her down and dispersed her shade, the doll in the hunter's dream would sometimes react. She would pause, as if sensing something, and say, "I will hear you no more, but know that I will always love you." The exact trigger for this dialogue is debated. Some say it happens when Maria is defeated. Others say it requires the hunter to speak with the doll while wearing Maria's clothes. But regardless of the specific conditions, the meaning is clear. The doll, created in Maria's image, infused with life by the moon presence, somehow sensed when Maria's presence in the nightmare was ended, and she mourned. Not with the passionate grief that Maria herself might have felt, but with the gentle, accepting sadness that defined the doll's entire existence. "I will hear you no more," as if the doll and Maria had been connected somehow, as if the doll had been able to sense her original across the boundary between dream and nightmare, as if she had been listening to Maria this whole time, to her suffering, to her endless vigil, to her desperate attempts to keep the secrets buried. And now that connection was severed. Maria was truly gone, not just dead but dispersed. Her presence in the nightmare ended by the hunter who had defeated her, and the doll, who had never been quite real, who had never been quite Maria, grieved in her simple way, but know that I will always love you. The tragedy of surrogates. Let's step back and look at the broader picture, at the cosmic horror underlying all of this personal tragedy. Because Gehrman and Maria's story doesn't exist in isolation. It's part of a larger pattern that defines the entire world of Bloodborne. Every great one loses its child. This isn't just flavor text, it's a fundamental law of the Bloodborne universe. Great ones, these cosmic entities that exist beyond human understanding, reproduce or try to, and their children always die. Always. The Orphan of Kos was murdered by humans, but even if it hadn't been, it would have died somehow. Rom the vacuous spider was transformed into a great one by Willem's rituals, but she never had children. Murgo exists only as a disembodied cry, a newborn whose life ended almost as soon as it began. The moon presence had a child and lost it, and in their grief, every great one yearns for a surrogate. This is what drives the entire plot of Bloodborne. Queen Yharnam pregnant, with Murgo was killed by the Healing Church's operatives. Murgo's cry echoes through the nightmare, calling to its mother, who can never answer. The moon presence created the hunter's dream and bound Gehrman to it, seeking a surrogate child to replace the one it lost. Rom was granted cosmic eyes and transformed into a great one, but could never reproduce, could never fill that void. Even Kos, lying dead on the beach, had lost her orphan to human cruelty. Gehrman's story mirrors this cosmic pattern on a human scale. He loved Maria and lost her, not to death initially, but to the impossibility of his love being returned. He created the doll as a surrogate, a replacement for the real Maria he could never have. And that surrogate was hollow, empty, unable to truly fill the void. Then the moon presence offered him a deal. It would give life to his surrogate, would create a dream where he could exist with her, where he could continue his work as a hunter. All he had to do was become the moon presence's surrogate child, filling the void left by its own lost offspring. A chain of surrogates, each one trying to replace something irreplaceable, each one failing in their own way. The doll was a surrogate for Maria, but she lacked Maria's spirit. Gehrman was a surrogate for the moon presence's child, but he was a prisoner rather than beloved offspring. The hunters who came through the dream were surrogates for Gehrman, giving him purpose, people to train and guide, a reason to exist. But they always left or died, and he remained. And Maria herself had become a surrogate of sorts in the nightmare, a guardian standing between hunters and the truth about the Fishing Hamlet, replacing her former self with this twisted reflection who used all the powers she had rejected in life. Surrogates, replacements, substitutes, none of them real, none of them satisfying, all of them hollow attempts to fill voids that could never truly be filled. The horror of unrequited love. At its core, Gehrman and Maria's story is about unrequited love taken to its most horrifying extreme. Not the kind of unrequited love where someone pines away sadly and eventually moves on, but the kind that consumes, that destroys, that refuses to accept reality no matter the cost. Gehrman loved Maria, not in a healthy way, not in a way that wanted what was best for her, but with an obsession that demanded possession even when possession was impossible. He kept her hair ornament in a cupboard, studied books on picking up women while she trained right there in his workshop, created a physical replica of her body when she died. And through all of this, Maria never knew. She respected him as a teacher. She admired his skill. She learned from him and probably considered him a friend, a mentor, perhaps even a father figure. But she was completely unaware of the depth of his feelings, of the mania building beneath his professional exterior. Did Maria ever love anyone? We don't know. The game never tells us. She might have been romantically interested in someone else, or she might have been focused entirely on her work as a hunter, or she might have simply never thought of Gehrman in that way. It doesn't matter. The point is that she never knew she was the object of such intense devotion, never had the chance to accept or reject it, never got to make that choice. And that's part of what makes this story so unsettling. Gehrman's love existed entirely in his own head, projected onto Maria without her knowledge or consent. He fell in love with an idealized version of her, a Maria who existed only in his imagination, perfect and unchanging. The real Maria was complex, troubled, capable of terrible guilt and desperate attempts at redemption. But Gehrman's Maria was frozen in amber, eternal, the beautiful skilled hunter he had trained. When the real Maria died, when she slit her throat in the Astral Clocktower, Gehrman didn't grieve for the person she actually was. He grieved for the fantasy version he had built in his mind, and he recreated that fantasy as the doll, expecting it to fill the void. But the doll couldn't be Maria because she wasn't real. She was Gehrman's fantasy made flesh, and fantasies are always disappointing when they become tangible. The doll was too perfect, too compliant, too gentle. She lacked all the rough edges that made Maria human, all the passion and fire and capacity for guilt that made her interesting. Gehrman found himself trapped with a pale imitation of the woman he loved, unable to connect with her, unable to find comfort in her presence, but also unable to escape. The moon presence had granted his wish in the most cruel way possible, giving him exactly what he asked for while ensuring it would never be what he actually wanted. This is the horror of obsession. It blinds you to reality, makes you believe that possession is the same as connection, that having someone's image is the same as having them. Gehrman wanted Maria so badly that he was willing to create a lifeless doll and pretend it was enough. And when given the chance to bring that doll to life, he leapt at it without considering the cost. Now he sits in the hunter's dream, surrounded by perfect flowers that smell slightly wrong, accompanied by a perfect companion who isn't quite right, trapped in a perfect prison he built for himself out of love that's never returned. The weight of guilt. But Gehrman's obsession isn't the only tragedy here. Maria's story is equally heartbreaking, if not more so, because her suffering came from moral clarity rather than delusion. Maria knew what she had done was wrong. There was no ambiguity for her, no rationalizing the horrors at the Fishing Hamlet as necessary for the greater good. She had participated in or witnessed the butchering of innocent people, the murder of an unborn god, all in the name of knowledge and eyes and insight. And she knew it was unforgivable. She tried to atone. She became a caretaker at the research hall, offering small kindnesses to people being tortured in the name of science. She gave Adeline a key to a balcony, gave patients whatever comfort she could. But every act of kindness was drowned out by the ongoing experiments, by the patients who died under examination, by the horror that continued regardless of her efforts. She threw away her Rakuo, casting it into a well as if the weapon itself was contaminated by what it had been used for. But throwing away a weapon doesn't erase the memories of what you did with it. The blood on her hands remained, metaphorically speaking, no matter how much she tried to wash it off through acts of mercy. And eventually, the weight became too much. She couldn't live with what she knew, couldn't exist in a world where such things happened, where scholars cracked open skulls looking for eyes, where corpses weren't left alone, where the secrets beckoned so sweetly that people committed atrocities to obtain them. So she ended it, slit her throat and wrists, bled out in a chair at the top of the Astral Clocktower, died believing that at least she could escape the guilt through death. But death offered no escape. The curse of the Fishing Hamlet, the vengeance of Kos, dragged her into the hunter's nightmare. She became trapped there, forced to guard the very secret she wished could be buried forever, forced to use the blood magic she had spent her life rejecting, forced to exist in a state between life and death where the guilt could never be resolved. Her final words to hunters who find her are telling, "A corpse should be left well alone." Oh, I know very well how the secrets beckon so sweetly, Only an honest death will cure you now. She's talking to the hunters, warning them away from the fishing hamlet. But she's also talking about herself. She's a corpse that wasn't left alone, caught in the nightmare, unable to truly die. And the secrets do beckon sweetly. They called to the Bergenwerth scholars, made them commit atrocities. They call to hunters, make them delve deeper into nightmares. They called to Maria herself once, and she hates that she answered that call. An honest death would cure her. But there's no such thing in the nightmare. Death there is just another transition, another phase, another loop in the eternal cycle. Even when hunters defeat her and disperse her shade, we don't know if that truly ends her suffering or if she's simply reset, waiting for the next hunter to arrive. Maria's tragedy is the tragedy of someone who understood exactly what they had done wrong and could never make it right. No amount of kindness could balance out the horror at the fishing hamlet. No act of atonement could bring back the murdered villagers or the orphan of Kos. She was damned by her own moral clarity, unable to live with herself but unable to truly die either. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank you for listening this far. These deep dives into video game lore take a tremendous amount of research and writing, and knowing that people are out there settling in with these stories makes it all worthwhile. If you're enjoying this exploration of Gehrman and Maria's tragedy, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It helps other people discover these videos and find some comfort in the dark. Please consider subscribing to Nightfall Lore. There are so many more tales to tell, so many more dark corners to explore together. Now, let's return to the streets of Yharnam and the tangled fates of the first hunter and his lost student. The interconnected nightmares. One of the most fascinating aspects of Gehrman and Maria's story is how their fates remained intertwined even across different planes of existence. The hunter's dream and the hunter's nightmare should have been completely separate, two different realms with no connection. But Gehrman and Maria created a bridge between them through their shared guilt and shared tragedy. The Orphan of Kos serves as the linchpin connecting these realms. Its death at the fishing hamlet created the hunter's nightmare, a curse specifically designed to torment those who had participated in or benefited from that atrocity. Maria was trapped there, forced to guard the approach to the hamlet, to prevent anyone from discovering what had been done. But Gehrman, who was also present at the fishing hamlet, wasn't dragged into the nightmare. The moon presence's contract had bound him to the dream instead, creating a different kind of prison for him. Yet he still felt the orphan's presence, still heard its cries across the boundary between realms. The same audio file used for Gehrman's desperate sobbing in his sleep was used for the orphan's cries, suggesting a deep connection between them. It's as if Gehrman's guilt over the fishing hamlet manifested as the orphan, or the orphan's curse reached into the dream to torment him, or perhaps both. The boundaries between these realms, between dream and nightmare, between guilt and punishment, were never as solid as they appeared. And when hunters finally defeated the orphan, when they freed its shade and allowed it to return to the ocean with its mother, Gehrman slept peacefully for the first time. The doll noticed it immediately, commented on how calm he sounded. One piece of his guilt was lifted, one connection to the nightmare severed. But Maria remained. Even with the orphan gone, even with that curse broken or weakened, Maria's shade continued guarding the clock tower, continued fighting anyone who approached. Her punishment wasn't tied solely to the orphan's vengeance. It was tied to her own guilt, her own inability to forgive herself for what she had done. This suggests something profound about the nature of these nightmares. They weren't just external punishments imposed by cosmic forces. They were internal, created and sustained by the guilt and suffering of those trapped within them. The nightmare couldn't release Maria because Maria couldn't release herself. She had internalized her punishment so completely that even breaking the curse wouldn't free her. Gehrman was slightly different. His suffering in the dream came partially from external sources, the moon presence's binding, and partially from internal sources, his obsession with Maria, his guilt over the fishing hamlet. When the orphan was defeated, his guilt lessened and he could sleep. But he was still bound by the moon presence, still trapped in the dream, still unable to escape. The only way to truly free Gehrman was for someone else to take his place, to defeat him and either become the new prisoner or transcend the system entirely. And even then, we never see what happens to Gehrman after his release. Does he wake in Yharnam? Does he die? Does he simply cease to exist? His purpose fulfilled? The game doesn't tell us. But for Maria, freedom only came through dispersal, through being defeated so thoroughly that her shade couldn't reform. And even that might not be permanent. The nightmare is eternal in nature, and shades that are defeated there might simply reform eventually, trapped in the same cycles forever. Two people, bound by shared experience and separate suffering, trapped in different hells that were somehow connected. Neither able to help the other, neither even fully aware of the other's suffering. Gehrman had the doll, a hollow imitation of Maria, while the real Maria fought endlessly in the nightmare. Maria guarded secrets that tormented her, while Gehrman sat in ignorance of her fate, unable to help even if he had known. It's a perfect tragedy. Two people who should have been able to support each other, to share their burdens, to find some measure of comfort in their shared guilt and shared humanity. But they never did. Gehrman was too caught up in his obsession to see Maria as a person rather than an object of desire, and Maria was too isolated in her guilt to reach out for help, to share what she was feeling, to accept support even if it had been offered. They died alone, suffered alone, and remained alone even in their respective afterlives. The only connection between them was the doll, and she was too hollow to serve as a real bridge between dream and nightmare. The nature of love in Bloodborne. Bloodborne is not a game about love. It's a game about blood and beasts and cosmic horror, about the folly of seeking forbidden knowledge, about the price of evolution and the curse of insight. But woven through all of that is Gehrman's story, and his story is fundamentally about love, or at least about obsession masquerading as love. What Gehrman felt for Maria doesn't quite qualify as healthy love by any reasonable standard. Healthy love wants the other person to be happy, to flourish, to live their best life even if that doesn't include you. Healthy love respects boundaries, accepts rejection, recognizes the other person's autonomy and choices. Gehrman's love did none of these things. It was possessive, obsessive, demanding. He wanted Maria not as a partner but as an object, something he could have and hold and keep. When she died, his first instinct wasn't to mourn her as a person, but to recreate her, to make a replacement he could control. This is the dark side of a love, the selfish side that many stories ignore or romanticize. Gehrman wasn't a romantic hero pining for his lost love. He was a man whose obsession destroyed him, and, arguably, destroyed any chance of real connection with the woman he claimed to love. Because if he had actually loved Maria in a healthy way, he would have told her. Not to pressure her into returning his feelings, but to be honest, to give her the information she needed to make her own choices about their relationship. If she had rejected him, a healthy response would have been to accept that rejection, to maintain whatever friendship or professional relationship they had, to respect her decision. But Gehrman never gave Maria that choice. He kept his feelings hidden, built them up in secret, created this elaborate fantasy in his mind where Maria was this perfect, untouchable ideal. And then, when she died, he treated her memory the same way he'd treated her in life, as something to be possessed, rather than someone to be respected. The doll represents the ultimate expression of this possessive love. She's designed to look like Maria, to sound like Maria, but to have none of Maria's independence or personality. The doll exists to serve, to be gentle and compliant and always available. She's Gehrman's fantasy made flesh, Maria without all the inconvenient parts that made her human. And yet the doll achieves something Gehrman never could. When Maria's shade is finally defeated in the nightmare, the doll mourns her genuinely. I will hear you no more, but know that I will always love you. Simple words, but they carry a depth of feeling that suggests the doll somehow understood Maria better than Gehrman ever did. Perhaps being created in Maria's image gave the doll some connection to her, some understanding that Gehrman lacked. Or perhaps the moon presence in giving the doll life also gave her the capacity for genuine feeling that transcended her origins as a lifeless replica. Either way, the doll's love for Maria seems more real, more genuine than Gehrman's ever was. This creates a fascinating and tragic irony. Gehrman created the doll out of obsessive love for Maria, but the doll ended up embodying a healthier form of love than Gehrman was capable of. She loved Maria without needing to possess her, mourned her without trying to recreate her, accepted her loss without trying to fill the void with substitutes. The doll became what Gehrman should have been, someone who truly loved Maria for who she was rather than what she represented. The symbolism of the clock tower. Let's talk about the Astral Clocktower, because it's central to Maria's story and rich with symbolism. This massive structure sits atop the research hall, its mechanism designed to interpret the stars, to read cosmic secrets from the heavens. It represents the pursuit of knowledge, the attempt to understand the incomprehensible, the desire to pierce the veil of reality and see what lies beyond. Maria died at the top of this tower. She slit her throat and wrists in a chair that faced the clockwork mechanism, surrounded by all the trappings of the knowledge-seeking that had led to the Fishing Hamlet massacre. It's a deliberate choice of a location, a statement about what killed her even though she wielded the blade herself. The pursuit of knowledge killed Maria. Not literally, not directly, but the expedition to the Fishing Hamlet was driven by Byrgenwerth's insatiable need for eyes, for insight, for cosmic understanding. Maria participated in that expedition, saw what the scholars did in the name of knowledge, and it destroyed her. So she died surrounded by the instruments of that pursuit. The clock tower that seeks to interpret the stars, to find meaning in the cosmos, to achieve the kind of insight that drove the scholars to commit atrocities. She died in a building dedicated to the very thing that had damned her, and her blood stained that chair, those floors, that tower. In the nightmare version of the clock tower, her blood is still wet, still fresh, as if she died moments ago rather than years or decades in the past. The tower itself became marked by her death, contaminated by it, transformed from an instrument of knowledge-seeking into a monument to guilt and despair. When hunters approach Maria in the nightmare, they must first traverse the research hall below, seeing all the failed experiments, all the patients who suffered in the name of insight. They see people whose heads have swollen grotesquely, filled with eyes and brain matter. They see the balcony where Adeline stood, clutching the key Maria gave her, one small mercy in an ocean of cruelty. And then they climb to the clock tower, ring the bell, and Maria rises. She guards the passage beyond, the path that leads to the Fishing Hamlet. The clock tower serves as the threshold between the research hall and the ultimate secret, the sin that created the nightmare. And Maria stands at that threshold, refusing to let anyone pass, willing to fight and kill to keep the secrets buried. A corpse should be left well alone, she says. She's talking about Koz, about the villagers, about the orphan, but she's also talking about herself. She's a corpse at the top of a clock tower, a body that should have been left to rot in peace. Instead, she's been dragged into the nightmare, forced to continue existing, unable to truly die. The clock tower's mechanism continues ticking away, counting time that has no meaning in the nightmare, interpreting stars that don't truly exist in this twisted realm. It's all meaningless motion, cycles without purpose, time without progress. Just like Maria's endless vigil, just like the hunters who traverse the nightmare only to die and return, just like the patients in the research hall who suffer forever without dying. The clock tower is a perfect symbol for the futility of the knowledge-seeking that defines Bloodborne. All this effort, all this suffering, all these grand mechanisms designed to understand the cosmos. And what do they achieve? Nothing but more suffering, more guilt, more souls trapped in nightmares of their own making. Maria died in the clock tower, and the clock tower became her tomb, her prison, her monument. When hunters finally defeat her and disperse her shade, the clock tower remains, still ticking, still turning, still seeking to interpret stars it will never understand. The mechanism doesn't care about Maria's suffering, doesn't notice her absence. It just continues its meaningless function, indifferent to the tragedy that unfolded within its walls. The Rakuo and the well. Maria's weapon, the Rakuo, deserves special attention because of what she did with it, and what that action represented. The Rakuo was Maria's treasured weapon, a beautifully crafted tool that split into a katana and dagger. Its description says, lovingly named after a ship that brought her ancestors to these shores, this weapon is difficult to wield, suggesting that Maria did not favour it for its ease of use. She chose a difficult weapon deliberately. She could have used something simpler, something more straightforward. But Maria wasn't interested in easy. She wanted to prove that skill mattered more than supernatural power, that she could be great through technique and dedication, rather than relying on her Cainhurst blood magic. The Rakuo represented everything Maria believed about herself. She was better than her heritage, better than the blood arts, capable of greatness through her own effort and skill. The weapon was proof of that belief, evidence that she could reject the easy path of blood magic and still be formidable. And she threw it into a well. This wasn't just disposing of a weapon. This was a rejection of everything she had built her identity on. The Rakuo represented her belief that skill could be pure, that you could fight without resorting to dark powers. That technique was enough. By throwing it away, Maria was acknowledging that all of that was worthless. Because skill hadn't protected the villagers at the Fishing Hamlet. Technique hadn't prevented the massacre. All her dedication to fighting the right way, all her rejection of blood magic, All her effort to be better than her Cainhurst heritage, none of it had mattered when the scholars decided to commit atrocities. She had still participated, still been complicit, still failed to stop what happened. The well she threw it into is significant too. Wells are liminal spaces, thresholds between the surface world and the depths below. They're places where things are lost, where secrets are hidden. By throwing the Rakuo into a well, Maria was trying to bury it, to hide it away in the depths where it couldn't remind her of her failure. But things thrown into wells don't stay buried. Hunters who explore the Fishing Hamlet in the nightmare can retrieve the Rakuo from that same well, pull it back up from the depths. The weapon Maria tried to discard, the symbol she tried to bury, rises again. Because you can't hide from your past by throwing things away. The guilt remains even when the physical evidence is gone. And in the nightmare, Maria uses the Rakuo again. Not with the pure technique she favoured in life, but coated in blood, enhanced with the magic she had always rejected. She takes everything she once stood for and corrupts it, uses it in ways she would have found abhorrent, because in the nightmare all her principles have been stripped away. Only the desperate need to guard the secrets remains, and she'll use any method, any power, any technique to keep hunters from reaching the Fishing Hamlet. The Rakuo's journey mirrors Maria's own, from pristine weapon wielded with pure skill, to discarded relic in a well, to blood-soaked instrument in the hands of a nightmare shade, from symbol of her principles to symbol of her damnation. What Gehrman lost. It's important to understand that Gehrman didn't just lose Maria when she died. He lost the possibility of Maria. He lost the chance to ever have a real relationship with her, to ever confess his feelings and deal with whatever consequences came from that confession. He lost the opportunity to grow beyond his obsession, to either pursue a genuine connection or move on and find love elsewhere. Instead, he became frozen in that moment of loss. The hunter's dream, in recreating his workshop, essentially trapped Gehrman in the past. Every day in the dream is the same flowers blooming, the same doll walking the same paths, the same workshop with the same tools. Nothing changes, nothing grows, nothing moves forward. This stagnation is its own kind of torture. Humans need change, need growth, need the possibility of something different tomorrow than what we had today. We need to move through time, to age, to experience new things, to leave the past behind even when it hurts. But Gehrman can't do any of that. He's trapped reliving his glory days as a hunter trainer, but without any of the actual satisfaction those days brought. In life, he trained hunters who went out and made a difference, who grew and changed and became their own people. In the dream, hunters come through, get stronger, and then leave. They don't stay. They don't become his real students. They're just passing through, using him as a resource before moving on. And he has the doll, but she's not real. Not in the way that matters. She has Maria's appearance and voice, but none of Maria's fire. She's gentle where Maria was passionate, compliant where Maria was headstrong, hollow where Maria was achingly, devastatingly human. Gehrman sits in his wheelchair, unable to even walk most of the time, reduced to a fraction of what he once was. The legendary first hunter who moved like quicksilver, who invented trick weapons and defined the hunter's art, now just an old man in a chair, waiting for death that will never come. And the cruel irony is that this is what he asked for, not explicitly perhaps, but he made contact with the moon presence seeking to bring the doll to life, seeking some way to keep Maria with him, even after death. The moon presence granted that wish in the most malicious way possible, giving him exactly what he asked for while ensuring it would bring no satisfaction. The doll lives. She walks and talks and serves her function. But she's not Maria, and never will be. And Gehrman is bound to the dream, unable to die, unable to move on, unable to grow beyond his obsession. He got his wish, and it destroyed him far more thoroughly than simple grief ever could have. Maria's true nature. Who was Maria really? Beyond Gehrman's obsession, beyond her role as a tragic figure, beyond the symbol she became in death, who was the actual person? We can piece together some things from the evidence. She was someone with strong principles. Her rejection of blood, magic wasn't casual. It was fundamental to who she was. Despite being born into Cainhurst nobility, despite having access to powerful blood arts that could have made her nearly unstoppable, she chose the harder path. She chose to rely on skill alone. This suggests someone with deep convictions about how things should be done, about the right way to live, someone who valued personal achievement over inherited power, who wanted to earn respect rather than demand it through supernatural might. She was also compassionate, even gentle in some ways. The lumen flower brooch she wore, the way she cared for the patients in the research hall, the key she gave to Adeline so the poor woman could enjoy a breeze and the scent of flowers. These were acts of kindness from someone who saw suffering and wanted to ease it, even in small ways. But she was also a formidable hunter. You don't become one of Gehrman's prize students through kindness alone. Maria was deadly efficient, capable of cutting down beasts with ruthless precision. She had that particular combination of grace and lethality that defined the greatest hunters. Beautiful in motion, terrible in effect, and she was vulnerable to guilt in ways that destroyed her. Some people can compartmentalize, can participate in terrible things and then move on, telling themselves it was necessary or justified or just part of the job. Maria couldn't do that. The Fishing Hamlet broke something in her that could never be repaired. This suggests a person with a strong moral compass, someone who couldn't live with cognitive dissonance, who needed her actions to align with her values. When they didn't, when she had participated in something she knew was wrong, she couldn't rationalize it away. She could only try to atone, and when atonement proved impossible, she could only escape through death. Maria was probably the kind of person who would have been a hero in a different story. In a world where her principles weren't tested by impossible choices, where her compassion didn't run headlong into the brutal realities of Yharnam's knowledge-seeking, she might have been legendary for all the right reasons. A noble hunter who protected the innocent, who stood for something pure in a dark world. But Bloodborne isn't that kind of story. In Bloodborne, principles get you killed or worse. Compassion makes you vulnerable to the kind of guilt that transcends death. And trying to be good in a world defined by cosmic horror and eldritch madness just means you suffer more acutely when you inevitably fail. Maria's true nature was that of someone too good for the world she lived in, too principled for the choices she had to make, too compassionate to survive what she witnessed. She was doomed from the moment she joined the hunt, because someone with her moral clarity could never thrive in a place as dark as Yharnam. And Gehrman never truly knew her. He was so caught up in his fantasy, so obsessed with the surface level details of her appearance and fighting style that he missed who she actually was as a person. He loved an idealized version, a Maria who existed only in his imagination. The real Maria, with all her complexity and pain and moral struggle, remained invisible to him. This is perhaps the saddest part of their story. They worked together, fought together, existed in proximity for what must have been years, but they never really knew each other. Gehrman was blinded by obsession. Maria was focused on her own internal struggles. Two people orbiting each other but never truly connecting, never having the kind of honest conversation that might have changed everything. The endings and their meanings, the three possible endings to Bloodborne, each offer a different perspective on Gehrman's fate and what it means to be bound to the dream. In the childhood's beginning ending, where the hunter consumes 3/3 umbilical cords and transforms into an infant great one, Gehrman is presumably freed. The moon presence is defeated or driven off. The dream continues under new management, and the old contracts are broken. This is the closest thing to an happy ending Gehrman gets, though we never see what happens to him afterward. Does he wake in Yharnam, finally free after countless cycles? Does he die immediately, his body too worn and old to survive without the dream sustaining it? Or does he simply cease to exist, his purpose fulfilled, his contract ended? The game leaves it ambiguous, but there's something poignant about the idea of Gehrman finally being released by a hunter who has transcended the system entirely, not freed through replacement, not liberated by becoming the moon presence's new prisoner, but freed because someone broke the cycle completely. The hunter who was strong enough to kill a great one, who evolved beyond humanity, who remade the rules rather than accepting them. Maybe that's what Gehrman always wanted, not for someone to take his place, but for someone to be strong enough to end the whole cursed arrangement, to kill the moon presence and free everyone from these contracts and prisons and dreams. In the honouring wishes ending, where the hunter accepts Gehrman's offer and lets him grant the mercy of death, Gehrman continues his imprisonment. He freed one more hunter, gave one more person the escape he can never have, and then sits down to wait for the next one. Is a bittersweet ending for him. He got to perform one more act of kindness, to grant someone else the freedom he lacks, but nothing changes for him personally. And in the Yharnam sunrise ending, where the hunter defeats Gehrman but is then bound by the moon presence, Gehrman is freed, but someone else takes his place. The cycle continues with a new prisoner, a new guide, a new surrogate for the moon presence's lost child. This ending raises uncomfortable questions. Is Gehrman happy to be free even though someone else is suffering in his place? Does he feel guilt about that? Or is he so worn down by countless cycles that he simply accepts his liberation with relief, too exhausted to worry about what comes next? And what about the doll? She finds the new hunter sitting in Gehrman's chair and kneels before them just as she knelt before Gehrman. Does she mourn Gehrman's absence? Does she feel anything about the change? Or is she simply following her programming, serving whatever hunter occupies the dream regardless of who they are? The fact that she can mourn Maria, I will hear you no more, but shows no obvious reaction to Gehrman's departure, suggests that her connection to Maria ran deeper than her connection to Gehrman. Even though Gehrman created her, even though she served him for who knows how long, Maria remained her primary emotional attachment. This is fitting in a way. Gehrman created the doll out of obsessive love for Maria, and the doll ended up caring more about Maria than about her creator. Even Gehrman's greatest work, The Thing, he poured his love and skill into creating, ultimately oriented itself toward the woman he loved rather than toward him. He couldn't even create something that would truly be his, that would belong to him rather than to Maria's memory. The hunter's dream as metaphor. On a deeper level, the hunter's dream serves as a metaphor for being trapped by the past, for obsession that prevents you from moving forward, for the prison we create for ourselves when we refuse to let go. Gehrman is literally stuck in a recreation of his old workshop, unable to leave, unable to experience anything new. Every moment in the dream is about the past when he was a great hunter trainer, the past when Maria was alive, the past when everything seemed purposeful and meaningful. This is what obsession does. It traps you in memory, makes you recreate moments that are gone, prevents you from engaging with the present or building a future. Gehrman could have moved on after Maria's death, could have grieved, could have accepted the loss, could have found new purpose or even new love. But instead he built a doll, made a contract with an eldritch entity, and trapped himself in eternal replay of what he'd lost. The doll represents the futility of trying to recreate the past. She looks like Maria, sounds like Maria, but she's not Maria. She can never be Maria. And no amount of wishful thinking or elaborate creation can change that fundamental fact. The past is gone, and trying to bring it back only creates hollow imitations that mock what you've lost. The hunters who pass through the dream represent the possibility of change, of growth, of moving forward. They arrive weak and become strong. They face challenges and overcome them. They achieve their goals and then leave, moving on to whatever comes next. They don't stay stuck. They don't remain frozen. They progress. And Gehrman watches them come and go, guiding them toward the very thing he can't have: freedom. He helps them escape the dream while remaining trapped himself. It's generous in a way, selfless even. But it's also torture, having to constantly facilitate the very thing you desperately want but can never have. The flowers in the dream are significant too. They bloom eternally, never wilting, never dying, never changing. They're beautiful but static, locked in perfect eternal spring. This is what Gehrman's love for Maria became: preserved, unchanging, perfect in memory but dead in reality. A garden where nothing can die but nothing can truly live either. Every element of the hunter's dream reinforces this theme of beautiful stagnation. It's a place where nothing bad can happen, because nothing at all can happen. No change, no growth, no possibility of surprise or spontaneity. Just the same cycles repeated endlessly, the same conversations, the same functions performed in the same ways. This is what it means to be trapped by the past. Not dramatic torment, not obvious suffering, just the slow erosion of everything that makes existence meaningful. Days that blur together because they're all the same, interactions that feel hollow because they're scripted. A life that's technically safe and comfortable but fundamentally empty. Gehrman's weeping in his sleep reveals the truth beneath the dream's placid surface. He's not content. He's not at peace. He's desperately, achingly trapped, and he knows it. But there's nothing he can do except wait and hope that someday a hunter strong enough to free him will arrive. And when they do, when someone finally defeats him and either takes his place or transcends the system entirely, what will Gehrman feel in that final moment? Relief, gratitude, fear of the unknown? Or will he think of Maria one last time, wonder if he'll see her wherever he's going? Hope that maybe in whatever comes after the dream he'll finally have the chance to tell her how he felt. The broader implications. Gehrman and Maria's story doesn't exist in isolation. It reflects and reinforces the central themes of Bloodborne as a whole. The danger of obsession, the price of forbidden knowledge, the impossibility of escaping the past, and the tragedy of the great ones who yearn for what they've lost. Every major character in Bloodborne is trapped by something. Lawrence is trapped by his ambition to use blood ministration, which transforms him into the cleric beast of the hunter's nightmare. Master Willem is trapped by his conviction that eyes are the key to evolution, leaving him as a blind, petrified figure still muttering about lining your brain with eyes. Gascoigne is trapped by blood-drunk madness, unable to recognize his own daughter before he kills her. The Healing Church as an institution is trapped by its need to maintain the lie that blood ministration is safe and beneficial, even as evidence mounts that it's causing the beast scourge. The Byrgenwerth scholars are trapped by their conviction that any price is worth paying for insight, even murder and torture. And Gehrman is trapped by his obsession with Maria, by his inability to let go of what he'd lost, by his desperate attempt to recreate rather than accept. All of them, every single one, trapped by their refusal to accept reality, to acknowledge limits, to let go of what they want in favour of what is. This is the central tragedy of Bloodborne. Not the beasts, not the cosmic horror, but the human inability to accept that some things are beyond our reach, that some losses can't be recovered, that some yearnings can never be satisfied. The great ones lose their children and yearn for surrogates. Humans lose their loved ones and build monuments to them. Both are trapped by the same fundamental inability to accept loss and move forward. Maria's fate in the Hunter's Nightmare parallels this theme from a different angle. She tried to atone for her sins, tried to make up for the Fishing Hamlet, massacre by caring for the research hall patients. But atonement through action doesn't work when the guilt comes from something truly unforgivable. You can't balance out butchering innocent villagers by being kind to experimental subjects. The math doesn't work out, so she killed herself trying to escape through death. But even death wasn't escape because the curse of Kos dragged her into the nightmare. She wanted to leave corpses alone, to let the past rest, to stop the endless pursuit of knowledge that had led to atrocity. But she couldn't leave her own corpse alone. She became trapped in that moment of death, sitting in that chair, blood still wet, forever guarding secrets she wished could be buried. Neither Gehrman nor Maria could escape their pasts. Both became frozen in moments of loss and guilt, trapped in different kinds of hell, unable to move forward. And the connection between them, the one thing that might have offered comfort or understanding, was broken before it ever truly existed. Gehrman's obsession prevented real connection. Maria's death severed even the possibility. The lesson in the horror. What are we supposed to take from all this? What's the lesson in this tragedy, if there is one? Perhaps it's about the danger of unexpressed feelings. Gehrman never told Maria how he felt, and that silence allowed his feelings to metastasize into obsession. If he had been honest, if he had spoken up and faced whatever consequences came from that honesty, he might have been able to move on. Rejection hurts, but it's clean, it's final, it allows you to grieve and eventually heal. But Gehrman never gave Maria the chance to reject him, never gave himself the chance to move on. He stayed frozen in possibility, in maybe, in the fantasy of what could have been. And that fantasy eventually destroyed him more thoroughly than any beast ever could. Perhaps it's about the impossibility of recreating the past. The doll was Gehrman's attempt to bring back what he'd lost, and she served only to highlight how thoroughly lost it was. You can't recreate a person. You can't substitute something new for something irreplaceable. Trying only creates hollow shadows that mock what you're mourning. Perhaps it's about the price of a knowledge, the cost of pursuing truth no matter the consequences. Maria participated in the Fishing Hamlet massacre because she was following the scholars, because she was part of a system that valued insight above all else. And that participation destroyed her, literally and spiritually. Some knowledge isn't worth obtaining, some truths come at too high a price, or perhaps there's no lesson at all. Perhaps it's just tragedy, pure and simple. Two people whose lives became tangled in the worst possible ways, who suffered separately and died, or became imprisoned in isolation, whose connection was based on misunderstanding and obsession, rather than genuine knowledge of each other. Bloodborne doesn't offer easy answers or clear morals. It presents horror and lets us draw our own conclusions. Gehrman and Maria's story is part of that larger tapestry of tragedy, one thread among many in a world where suffering is the baseline and escape is impossible. But their story resonates because it's so human. Cosmic horror is terrifying in the abstract, but it's hard to truly feel the weight of elder gods and incomprehensible entities. A man loving a woman who never knew, trapped by that love for eternity, that we can understand. A woman so consumed by guilt that death offered no escape. That horror is intimate, personal, real. In a game full of monstrous transformations and eldritch abominations, the most terrifying thing might be Gehrman's weeping in his sleep. Oh, somebody, please. Just an old man begging for release, trapped in a dream built from his own obsession and a cosmic entity's manipulation. No tentacles, no impossible geometry, no sanity-blasting revelations. Just suffering, pure and simple, extending forever. That's the horror at the heart of Bloodborne. Not the beasts or the great ones, but the humans who create their own hells and then can't escape them. The scholars who torture people for knowledge. The church that maintains lies for power. The hunters who become so blood-drunk they can't stop killing. And Gehrman, who loved so obsessively that he trapped himself in a dream with a hollow imitation of his beloved, unable to wake, unable to die, unable to do anything but guide others toward the freedom he'll never have. Maria's horror is similar, not the nightmare itself, not the curse of Kos, but her own guilt. She could have rationalized what happened at the Fishing Hamlet, could have told herself it was necessary, that the knowledge gained justified the means, that she was just following orders. Many people in her position would have done exactly that, but Maria couldn't. Her moral clarity wouldn't allow it, so she tried to atone, failed, killed herself, and ended up trapped in the nightmare, still guarding the very secret she wanted buried. Even in death, even in eternal torment, she couldn't escape the consequences of that one terrible expedition. Conclusion. As we reach the end of this tale, we're left with the image of two people forever separated by circumstances and choices, by obsession and guilt, by dreams and nightmares that mirror each other but never touch. Gehrman sits in his wheelchair in the hunter's dream, guiding hunters, waiting for release, surrounded by flowers that never wilt and accompanied by a doll that wears the face of the woman he loved but none of her soul. He weeps in his sleep, begs for freedom from anyone who might listen, and grants to others the mercy he can never have for himself. Maria guards the clock tower in the hunter's nightmare, her blood still wet, her Rakuo coated in the very magic she rejected her entire life, fighting endlessly to keep hunters from discovering the secret of the Fishing Hamlet. She became everything she never wanted to be, transformed by guilt and curse into a twisted reflection of her former self. They were both hunters once. They fought together, trained together, existed in the same world. They might have been friends, might have understood each other's struggles if they had ever truly talked, but they never did. Gehrman was too caught in his obsession to see Maria as a person. Maria was too focused on her own moral struggles to notice Gehrman's feelings, and now they exist in separate prisons, bound by shared guilt over the fishing hamlet, but unable to comfort each other, unable to share their burdens, unable to do anything but endure alone. The only connection between them is the doll, and she's both bridge and barrier. She looks like Maria, sounds like Maria, but she's not Maria. She serves Gehrman but loves Maria. She exists because of Gehrman's obsession, but mourns Maria's true loss. She's a monument to everything that went wrong between them, a physical manifestation of Gehrman's inability to love Maria as a person rather than as an ideal. In the end, Gehrman and Maria's story is about the tragedy of missed connections, of words unspoken, of love that was never honestly expressed and could therefore never be properly resolved. It's about how obsession destroys the obsessed more thoroughly than any external enemy. It's about how guilt can follow you beyond death, how some sins don't wash away no matter how much you try to atone. It's about two people who should have been able to help each other but never did, who suffered alone when they might have found comfort together, who died or became trapped, with so much left unsaid between them. The hunter's dream and the hunter's nightmare exist as parallel hells, each containing one half of a relationship that never quite was. Gehrman, trapped with a hollow imitation of Maria, unable to escape his love for her even though she's gone. Maria, trapped by guilt over sins they both witnessed, guarding secrets they both share, fighting endlessly to prevent anyone from discovering what was done. They remain connected by absence, by what should have been but never was, by potential forever unrealized. Two souls who might have understood each other, who might have found solace in their shared experiences, but who never managed to truly connect. Now they exist in different kinds of forever, separate but linked, alone but tethered to each other through the doll who is and isn't Maria, through the guilt they both carry, through the tragedy of all the things they never said. Bloodborne is full of horrors, beasts that tear through the streets, cosmic entities that defy comprehension, knowledge that drives people mad. But perhaps no horror in the game is quite as poignant, quite as human, quite as devastating as this. Two people who cared for each other, or who might have cared for each other, or who could have cared for each other, but who never managed to bridge the gap between them, and now it's too late. Now they're both trapped in their separate eternities, forever alone, forever yearning, forever unable to reach the connection that might have saved them, both. If this journey through the tragic tale of Gehrman and Lady Maria has resonated with you, if you found some comfort or fascination in exploring the dark corners of Yharnam with me tonight, please consider hitting that like button and subscribing to Nightfall Lore. There are so many more stories to tell from Bloodborne and beyond, so many more tragic figures whose tales deserve to be remembered, so many more shadows to explore together. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing this long night with me as we wandered through the hunter's dream and the hunter's nightmare, piecing together the story of a love that was never spoken and a guilt that transcended death. Rest well, good hunter. May you find your worth in the waking world, and may you never be trapped in a dream built from your own obsessions, never imprisoned by the past you can't let go, never forced to endure alone when someone who might have understood was standing right beside you all along. Until next time, when we'll settle in for another tale from the dark. Farewell, and remember, sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones with fangs and claws. Sometimes they're just lonely people who loved the wrong way, or people who couldn't forgive themselves, or people who built prisons from their own broken hearts and then couldn't find the key to get out. Sweet dreams, everyone. Or perhaps, in Yarnum's case, may you wake from them.